So check this out. This was a debate from back in 2000 that was hosted at the USDA. It features speakers such as Dr. John McDougall, Dr. Dean Ornish, Robert Atkins, Barry Sears. Really spirited debate. Check it out. We'll talk later.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that, and I apologize for
Could I comment about that?
yes, this is a panel discussion. Of course, we can comment on anything. Go ahead, Dr. Ornish.
Well, first of all, the last time I debated Dr. Atkins, I chided him for not publishing any research anywhere, so I think this is a good start. It's not a particularly good study, but it's a good start. I'm just glad to say that he's doing research in that there's no control group. We don't know what these patients were eating when they started. I mean, they could have been eating a diet even higher in fat when they started. There's no baseline data at all. There was no change in the LDL. And the only published study that was done of an Atkins diet was done in 1980 by John LaRosa in the Journal of the American Dietetic Association. And they found that the LDL did go up and the cholesterol levels did go up. And so I think that while I applaud the beginning of doing research, I think that we need to evaluate research based on the standards of good science.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go to, certainly, go ahead.
I wanted to make one comment, and all of the panelists have said that, you know, we want to give the best information available. I think there are 2 points that need to be made. Dr. Ornish's presentation was superb, and I applaud what he's doing. But I want everyone to realize that atherosclerotic coronary artery disease or vascular disease or hardening of the arteries, whatever term you want to apply to it, is an aging process. When Ponce de Leon failed to find the fountain of youth, we can't reverse aging. What Dr. Ornish and I think all of us are trying to do is slow down the process. But don't go home thinking that if you do this or this, you can prevent coronary artery disease. If you live long enough, you will get it. Second misconception, the comment was made that calories produce fat. Calories don't produce fat. Calorie is a unit of heat. Fat produces fat, protein produces fat, and carbohydrates produce fat. The key is moderation. Don't eat so much of them that you become fat. Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to just say I agree with everything that you said. I applaud Dr. Bethay. You're helping people become more aware of the importance of limiting the intake of simple sugars. But I do strongly disagree with your statement that heart disease is an inevitable fact of aging. It's an inevitable fact of aging when people eat a diet like people in this country have eaten. But in other cultures, heart disease is quite rare, even when people get older. So I think we can give people a more hopeful message that there actually is a lot they can do. And if you can stop or reverse heart disease, then you can probably prevent it. It's not such a leap of faith.
Let me ask the protein folks, I'm sorry to lump you in. And one thing I think, Dr. Sears, very important, can you explain that how your diet is specifically different from Atkins?
Well, as I tried to point out in the presentation, that the diet is based on 2 words most Americans hate to hear: balance and moderation. When you're eating 10 to 15 servings of fruits and vegetables per day, I don't think anybody could disagree with that. If you're never eating any more than 3 to 4 ounces of low-fat protein at a meal, I don't think anyone can disagree with that. And if you're adding small amounts of heart-healthy monounsaturated fat to your diet, I don't think anyone could disagree with that. What we have is, from the standpoint, we have, again, a misconception here. We have to basically, as I said earlier, get back and look at this epidemic of obesity from a different perspective. Treat it as a disease and find the most appropriate blood parameter that predicts it, and that is excess insulin. If you're following Dr. Ornish's diet and your insulin levels are under control, keep following it. If you're following Dr. Atkins' diet and your insulin levels are under control, keep following it on a lifetime basis. But if both those 2 extremes are not working for you, then begin to moderate your diet and eat the things that we are genetically designed to eat. We're designed to eat fruits and vegetables. We are not designed to eat grains. They did not exist on the face of the earth 10,000 years ago.
Well, thank you for that. And, you know, Dr. Atkins, following up on, let's say, the severe, which you're usually put in that category, would you have a patient that would come to you? Because I think about the importance today about treating the individual and everybody's individual lifestyles, food preferences. Have you had people who come to you and you'd say to them, I don't think this is for you?
Well, 50% of my patients, I don't think it's for them, because 50% of my patients don't have a weight problem.
Okay, of the people who do have a weight problem.
That rarely happens. If the weight problem is serious, then I'm going to work on restricting carbohydrates. They may have some other problems. I never put any 2 people on the same diet because we do food allergy testing, So we know right from the very beginning which foods certain people have to avoid, and that's not the same in other people. And they may come in with a different problem. I don't want people to think that most people come to me with a weight problem. Only about 10% of the people come to me. It's because I am a cardiologist. Most of the time they come to me because they were told the same thing that David Letterman heard. You've got to have a bypass, only these people weren't intimidated enough to get it right away. They came to see me, and 85% of those people didn't need a bypass after we went on our program. This is why I sort of resent the idea that people are saying that my diet is not heart healthy. If it were not heart healthy, we wouldn't be reversing heart disease and getting these people who were having chest pain on a little bit of exertion out there running and jogging a few months later.
This brings me to Dr. Ornish to follow up on that. Dr. Ornish, would you then, this is a question from someone in the audience, tiny handwriting, by the way, with your focus being on disease prevention diet and reversal diet, would you at any time recommend a high-protein diet for severely obese individuals? I mean, high-protein fasting?
Well, first of all, let me say that I would love to see some data from Dr. Atkins showing that he can actually get reversal of heart disease, measuring the underlying disease process.
We're working on it.
Well, good.
But we're not as good a fundraiser as you are. We have to dig into our own pockets. That's the problem.
I'm sorry. Carolyn, can I address that issue?
I think with the number of books you've sold, you could probably fund your own studies.
These are the different numbers.
I recommend most people, unfortunately, when they think about the diet I recommend, think about the reversal diet. And it is a strict diet, and I'd love to be able to tell people that more moderate changes can reverse heart disease, but they don't. Every study that's been done where they've looked at arteriography has found that a 30% fat diet, the majority of people continue to get worse. But there is a genetic variability in how efficiently your body can handle fat and cholesterol. And it's a bell curve. In fact, the Nobel Prize in 1975 went to Brown and Goldstein to discover the LDL receptors. On one end of the spectrum are the 95-year-old men or women, and you say, what do you eat? And they say, oh, I have 12 eggs for breakfast and a steak for lunch. And you kind of go, well, maybe a diet isn't that important. Look what they're eating. But they're so efficient at getting rid of fat and cholesterol, it almost doesn't matter what they eat. And those people who weren't so efficient at getting rid of it never made it to 95, so you have a selected group. On the other end of the bell curve are people with heart disease or high cholesterol. In general, they have fewer LDL receptors, they're less efficient, and so that's why just making moderate cutbacks in fat and cholesterol doesn't go far enough, because they're still eating more than they can get rid of, and it keeps building up in their arteries. So what I tell people is that if your cholesterol level is below 150 consistently, or your ratio of total to HDL is below 4, then either you're not eating much fat and cholesterol or your body's very good at getting rid of it. Either way, your risk of disease is so low, whatever you're doing is probably fine.
Thank you.
Most people don't fall into that category, and they can begin by making more moderate changes until they get to that point.
Okay. Which reminds me when I went to the mechanic and they said, I think your microtuner's maladjusted. I'm like, I didn't know what it meant. So sometimes the explanations are long, they're complicated, but they're very important, obviously, in educating, especially when most of the American public has no baseline of nutrition knowledge. You wanted to make a comment, Dr. Ayub?
Just because it was brought out about Dr. Atkins' claim to reverse heart disease. And he said he's working on the data, but he's been making this claim for a long time.
No, I haven't.
And that's what excuse me.
But I haven't been making that claim.
You just did, and you don't have the evidence to back it up. Now, this diet's been out there for 30 years, or close to 30 years.
And I haven't been able to fund a study. I've asked
excuse me. 10 million books in print, and you can't fund the study?
Now I can. And I will be the first doctor to dig into his own pocket to do a study. And it will be me, but it was the first time I had
10 million books. You market the vitamins. You sell the vitamins to correct the nutritional deficiencies.
That's true. That's why I'm doing a study now.
I keep saying...
That's why I couldn't do it before.
You market this. I say this is not for the public good. This is marketed. This is a money-making proposition.
Yeah, and I think what happens with tests and research and studies, which is what we've all been talking about, I even wonder, too, what the level playing field is in presenting information. We have found, we have shown, certainly all of us in the press want to know where those statements come from, what they're based on, and is there, in fact, a level playing field when people go and give their presentations? And Dr. McDougall, you haven't said anything in a while, so we'll bring you in. In terms of presenting, everybody can throw up their, Journal of the American, this, that, and the other thing. And Does it matter how many you have piled up there to make your diet the best?
This is why I gave an example that no one can deny, and that is you look around the world. What do you see? If I asked you to design a diet, and I gave you the world and the populations of people, design a diet where people would be thin for a lifetime, what populations would you pick? China, Korea, Japan, African countries. It's obvious. They live on starch-based diets with the addition of fruits and vegetables, and rich foods are kept to a minimum. And when these people move to the United States or change their diet in their own land, they consistently get fat, heart disease, rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, and on and on. This is a no-brainer.
But
Also, can I speak on this for 1 second?
Yes, quickly. Remember, this is not a long period of time.
What we're looking at is saying there are so few long-term intervention studies. There are only 2 to my knowledge. One is Dr. Ornish's lifestyle trial. He did not address the point I brought out, how to explain why he had twice the number of fatal heart attacks, not cardiovascular hospitalization, but fatal heart attacks, in comparison to another recently published long-term intervention trial, the Leon Diet Heart Study, that had 4 times as much fat, but on that arm, those following that diet eating more fruits and vegetables and eating more omega-3 fatty acids compared to control diet, they had 70% fewer fatal heart attacks.
we're talking about...
And keep it brief, Dr. Ornish, if you can.
Sure. We were talking about 1 versus 2 deaths. And in both deaths, Nova actually did a 1-hour documentary where they followed one of the people who died. And he died while greatly exceeding the exercise recommendations. He was on a rowing machine competing against a video game of other rowers, got his heart rate up way past what we told him to, and died while on the rowing machine. That's, what can you do? It wasn't following the program. And the other person who died had gotten off the program completely, was eating the kind of diet that Dr. Atkins and Dr. Sears might recommend, and died while on that. So we have to report all of the data, including the people who didn't follow it.
But Dr. Dornish, you had down here in your paper in JAMA that you had, again, both people in the experimental program who were dying.
Well, of course they're in the experimental program, because if they were in the control group, we wouldn't be asking them to follow the program. That's by definition.
Dr. Bethea?
Still on the cardiovascular disease, keep in perspective that the greatest risk factor to any of us is heredity. And in the Asian countries, it's true that there's a little lower incidence of cardiovascular disease, but remember, this country has the greatest medical capability of the world. And a lot of the other countries in Asia do not have the diagnostic capabilities that we have, so we really don't know. I have been a consultant to the Jakarta Heart Institute, and I can tell you now we're finding that the incidence of coronary artery disease in Indonesia is just as high and may be higher than in the country of the United States.
And there are a number of questions about children. Who would like to address that? Dr. Atkins, for instance, would you put a child on this diet?
An overweight child should be on this diet, because this is going to really keep them away from attention deficit disorder and all the other problems which are associated with unstable blood sugar. It also prevents the craving of sweets, which is the one thing which makes it impossible to get a child thin as he grows up. Once they become a sugar addict, you have a real problem.
Well, I don't think anyone on the panel is disagreeing that too much refined sugar, I mean, again, is this common ground that we seem to be sharing, that perhaps too much refined sugar, too much refined carbohydrates is a health problem? But it's just in the... So where's the difference? And let me ask you this. Why does it matter that there is diet disagreement between you? Why would you care that Ornish doesn't agree with you, and why would you care that he doesn't agree with you?
Well, I do care that a lot of people are believing what Dr. Atkins is saying and making choices that I think are harmful to them. And to go back to your earlier question, I think that the way that people can help to reconcile different points of view is to say, what is the science? Are these published in peer-reviewed journals? The whole point of science is to help people resolve conflicting claims by saying, what is the evidence? What is the experimental design? Now, I'm not aware of any studies that Dr. Atkins or Dr. Sears have published in any peer-reviewed journal about anything ever. And, that's important. Now, we also found that we had a 2.5 times reduction in cardiac events. And the reason why a control group is important is so you know what would have happened anyway.
Why do you care that Dr. Ornish doesn't agree with you, or do you?
Well, I really care because I care about the people who are suffering because of all of the misinformation they've heard about obesity and its consequences. These people are being told something which is quite different from the experience that we have in treating people. The experience that we have is one of consistent improvements in health, in cardiac symptoms, as well as cardiac risk factors. And we see major improvements in diabetes. We see people who come to us taking insulin, and yet 80% of them, if they're type 2 diabetics taking insulin, get off their insulin.
Well, let me ask you to respond, too, to something, the criticism about the body odor and the bad breath and all these things that go with your, because I know you want to respond to that. And also this anecdote, can I just repeat this anecdote? Because I have, of course, interviewed people on the diet who perhaps weren't too thrilled with it, and they would say, you know, I was on the Atkins diet, I was on a high-protein diet, I was cranky, I was miserable, I lost a lot of weight, I looked great, but nobody wanted to talk to me.
So what's the point of
Well,
this?
I think that's minor. The number of people who actually present that as a complaint to me is so rare, it really doesn't happen. It's quite possible that these people are not taking vitamins or something because the people in my office simply don't have that problem. And if they did, it would be so minor compared to the major problems that they're confronted with. They're confronted with a need to have a bypass. They're
Okay, well, you didn't really answer the
with
question,
diabetes.
but-
They're on 6 or 7 high blood pressure medicines and other medications, and we get them off their medications. This is serious stuff. Whether the sweet smell of ketones is considered bad breath or just sweet breath is a matter of opinion.
Smells like money. Dr. McDougall?
Yeah, I want you to know that
We're
I'm
having
concerned
fun.
about the recommendations for high-protein diets because the foods that are emphasized are the very foods the Heart Association is condemned as causing heart disease, the Cancer Society is condemned as causing cancer, and the Surgeon General is condemned for being the leading cause of death and disability in this country. I'm concerned.
I am concerned about
Dr.
the American
Bethea.
Heart Association's recommendations of Fruit Loops and Pop-Tarts having their seal of approval. If that's their recommendation, I'm certainly happy that they're not in my camp. I wouldn't want them there.
Well, we'll check on that.
Carolyn, I think if we can give the audience and the press something to take away that we all agree on, that'll be a start. And I think that we all agree that the United States, this country, is eating too much refined sugar and too much processed grain. If you can take that away, I think most everyone here will agree with that.
I agree with that.
Carolyn?
How do you eat carbohydrates then? If you're saying eat the ones that are less processed,
saying
and somebody's saying don't eat carrots. I mean, you know.
I'm saying eat the ones that are the higher fiber, eat the ones that are in the grains, eat the whole grains, not the processed and enriched grains. We at Sugar Busters are not against carbohydrates. We need carbohydrates. We can't live without them. We're not restrictive. We're selective. You can make a better choice, and that's what we want each of you to do.
One more comment.
Also, we've heard a lot today about insulin and insulin resistance, et cetera, and how it goes down on all of the diets. And you know what? It does, because when you lose weight, your insulin resistance goes down. Okay, that's the bottom line. Any diet. Lose weight, the insulin resistance comes better under control. And insulin resistance is not due to a diet. It is not due to the carbohydrate. It is not due to the protein or the fat. It is due to obesity. Reduce weight, insulin becomes less of a problem. And that wasn't really clear